Things are not what they seem. Things are not what they seem. Can we let that thought sit with us for a minute? Things are not what they seem. One day, several years ago, I was on a hike with a friend. This is while I was still in seminary. I was on a hike with a friend of mine at a place called Amicalola Falls. It's in North Georgia, kind of getting up close to the North Carolina state line. Yeah, Diane knows. Now, before I tell you about this particular hike, I need to take a minute to set the table, okay? Y'all know that I talk about hiking a lot. I go hiking a lot. I've talked about hiking a lot from up here, right? So I've hiked a lot since that day. I've hiked many times since that day, which means that I've had the opportunity once or twice to lace up my boots, climb up to some high places, sweat a little bit, and see some beautiful sights. I've done this a time or two. But to this day, that hike haunts me. That hike haunts me. And it doesn't haunt me because it was a completely different experience of a hike. It's not like I walked up on my hands instead of my feet. We laced up our shoes, we walked up to a high place, and then we walked down. This has happened before in hiking, right? Once or twice. See a couple of our hikers nodding. We walked up, we walked back. We got sunburns, we sweated, we caught our breath, we drank water. We did all the things that people do in hiking. We did really what people have been doing for as long as people have been walking from one place to another, which is to say we did things that people have been doing for as long as there have been people. And yet, on this day and at this time, as we were walking along the path here, my friend and I, we saw some things, the likes of which I had not seen before, and I have not seen since. We reached the top of the mountain we were hiking to, and we were all sweaty and tired and gross, and we were feeling pretty, like we were ready to go home and get something to eat. And as we were walking our way back down, we came to an opening in the trail. There was a line of trees running along the right side of the trail. And we came and we looked through that opening, and we saw what felt like the entirety of North Georgia rolling out, spilling out in front of us. We saw these tall, proud mountains that you knew had been there for hundreds of thousands of years, that would be there for a long time after we all are gone. We saw the sun reaching out from the heavens and reaching down to bathe every single corner, every leaf, every branch, every square foot of soil, every single blade of grass in pure golden light. I feel a little bit sad telling you all this story, I'm going to be honest. And the reason why is because I know I'll never really be able to show you what that was like. Unless y'all want to, drive down for 6 hours, 7 hours, and go hike this trail with me. But it was a singular experience for me. It was something so beautiful that I haven't seen anything like it before. I didn't see anything like it before, and I haven't seen anything like it since. It was once in a lifetime. And it was proof to me that you can be doing something that you know very well, be doing something that you're very familiar with, and have something totally unexpected break into your life and leave you absolutely dumbstruck with awe. I know that because that's how I felt that day. And there are moments, experiences, people in our lives that leave us all feeling this way. You don't have to hike up and see a beautiful vista, a beautiful sight, to have that experience, because there are moments, experiences, people in our lives that we encounter, and in the course of that encounter, in the course of that experience, we realize that this person, place, thing which is before us is like everything else, but more so. Is like what we have seen before, but is somehow more than that. More than the norm, more than the expectation, more perhaps even than what we thought was possible. For generations, people have seen spectacles like what my friend and I saw that day. And I think we all know that it's a uniquely human thing to experience something like that, to look out at the beauty of the natural world, to look out at the beauty of our world, and to realize in a stunning moment of clarity that, you know what? We didn't make that. We tried. We mixed our concrete and we made our bridges. We made our roads. But we can't make things like that. We can't make mountains like that. We can't make trees like that. We can't make a sun like that. We can't make beauty like that. Those experiences are foundational to our understanding of who God is. They're part of the foundation, though. They're not the only thing in the foundation. There's another thing in that foundation. There's another piece, an important piece of our understanding of who God is. And that would be people. Have you noticed that? We can all see beautiful sights, but people make up the core. Our experiences with people make up the core of who we understand God to be. And today we encounter in our Bible passage two worthy examples of people who have shaped the faith lives of generations upon generations upon generations of other faithful. Moses and Elijah are examples from the Old Testament of people who inspire, people who shape, people who change the world. Moses and Elijah were both prophets, were both leaders, were both people who shepherded the people of God in times of extraordinary challenge and danger. Within the witness of Scripture, they stand up to us all as shining examples of what God can accomplish in the lives of faithful people. They stand out, they stand apart. But maybe they shouldn't quite so much. Because Moses and Elijah, if you really get down to brass tacks here, are extraordinary people. But they are very, very, very much people when you get to know them. They were flawed, and they were weak, and they were imperfect. They were human, and they were bound by their humanity. They were extraordinary in several ways, it's true, and yet in other ways they were very much like all of us. They function as unusual examples of the possibilities of what God can do in human life. They're sort of like, a pleasant hike on a good day. You remember them fondly. You might even change your routine based on their memory. But you know what? They really don't fundamentally inspire you to change your understanding of how God works in the world necessarily. Moses was God's agent of liberation, but Moses was barred by God from entering into the promised land due to his unfaithfulness. Elijah was God's prophet and God's voice in a time of division and faithlessness, but Elijah could not stop Israel's descent into immorality and idolatry. They are examples of God acting in the world in powerful ways, but they are not examples of God fundamentally changing the lenses through which we view the world, the lenses through which we experience life, the lenses through which we come to understand how God can be here with us. They were both key players in extraordinary stories. But at the end of the day, they were very much people, and they were very much human. And they had more in common, in the end, with the people that they were trying to persuade, reprimand, and inspire than otherwise. Today, though, our passage isn't primarily about Moses and Elijah. It's about another man. And today we watch that man lead 3 of his disciples, Peter, James, and John, on a hike up a mountain. Do you think they were expecting a life-changing, transformative experience on that mountain as they walked up? It's fair to wonder, too, who do you think the disciples thought they were following? How do you think they understood this man? Did they see him as the next in a line of great prophets? Did they see him as the next in a line of great leaders? Certainly, as they reach the top of the mountain and as the disciples watch Jesus being transfigured before them, as they watch Moses and Elijah appear before them and begin to speak with Jesus, it seems reasonable for the disciples, or at least for Peter, to conclude that Jesus is basically like these other guys, that he is basically a new example of an old phenomenon, a new chapter in an old story. And certainly, to some extent, that is true. That is fair. They properly see Jesus as a special man with a special faith and special gifts, an extreme example of the possibilities of human faithfulness. They recognize that Jesus deserves to stand next to Moses and Elijah, as Moses and Elijah stand next to men like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. When Peter sees these 3 men conversing, it's altogether reasonable for him to offer to Jesus to build shelters for them so that they can stay on the mountain together. It's his way of saying that he sees some of the same things in Jesus that he also sees and has been taught to see in Moses and Elijah. These 3 together are people of unusual faith, unusual courage, through whom God does unusual things. But things are not what they seem. Things are not what they seem today. As Elijah, Jesus, and Moses stand together before them, the disciples are covered in a cloud, and they hear a voice from on high calling out to them, saying, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." Listen to him. Listen to him. And when the disciples recover from their shock and open their eyes and try to begin to collect themselves, only one of the 3 who stood there moments before remains. Jesus. Jesus remains. "My Son," God says, "listen to him, not my sons. Listen to him." 3 great leaders of Israel have stood before the disciples. 3 men who have all contributed and will keep contributing in their memory and in their stories great things for the people of God. 3 men stand there, all deserving of their place in our hearts and in our stories as people of faith ourselves. But when the cloud clears and the divine voice has finished ringing out, only one remains. And as the disciples head back down that mountain, they are forced to grapple with the fact that this man who remained, that this man who walked them up the mountain and this man who walks with them back down the mountain, might not be what they thought he was, might not fit into their worldview, that he might be like Moses and Elijah, but he also might be something more. God has worked through the faithful to shape the world and to protect God's people for generations. But God has never broken into our world, except that now God has done precisely that. Up to this point in the year, we've explored together both the joy and the challenge of God's breaking into our world, of being followers of Christ. We have journeyed together towards understanding who Jesus is, and by extension, who he is not. And now, as we commemorate Jesus' transfiguration, and as we turn towards Lent, we are given this powerful reminder that whatever else Jesus might be, he is already more than we think he is. More than a great prophet, more than a great leader, more than a healer, more than a preacher, more than a moral philosopher, more than perhaps even the best human being who ever lived. He is more than this. Things are not what they seem, because Jesus is so much more than we could ever imagine. As we prepare our hearts and our minds for Lent, for the days ahead, may we remember that Christ is not just who he seems to be to us in a given moment. May we remember this because it is true. May we remember this because it is by holding on to that truth that we can grasp richly and fully the new life that he offers us, both in eternity and here and now, here on earth. Getting to the top of the mountain is tough. It takes sweat. It takes effort. It takes patience. Sometimes it even takes courage. But when you stand up there and you experience all that God is up to in this world, all that God has done, will do, and is doing right now, you cannot help but be changed. May we open our hearts and our minds to God's transforming power and love, and embrace the joyful news that things are not what they seem, and that there is more holy mystery, more frightful hope, more unsettling divinity in our midst than we could ever possibly know. Amen. Amen.